The pandemic continues to evolve. It continues to set its own rules. And what's incredibly important that as governments around the country, whether it's the New South Wales government and the Commonwealth government, state and territory governments around the country, we must continue to work together to keep pace and, where possible, get ahead of those events wherever we possibly can. And Australia's record when it comes to saving lives and saving livelihoods speaks to the way that we've been able to do that together. And no more has that been the case than here in New South Wales, that has done an exemplary job in saving lives and livelihoods during the course of this pandemic. As we have gone through this year, as we remain in the suppression phase, we came to an agreement at National Cabinet a few weeks back, before these most recent lockdowns, where we agreed that the Commonwealth would provide support directly for income support for individuals, and that state governments and territory governments would provide the support for business payments. Now, in the case of the lockdown that most recently occurred in Victoria, that's exactly what has occurred, and we have followed those same arrangements here in New South Wales that were put in place for Victoria. Thankfully, that lockdown only endured for 2 weeks. But clearly here in New South Wales, the situation has taken a very different turn. The New South Wales outbreak has proved to be more severe, more dangerous, and it's in the national interest that we now put in place an upgraded set of arrangements for cooperation with the states and territories that will first be put in place here with New South Wales when lockdowns enter into more protracted situations, i.e. we're now about to go, we're in week 3 now, and the Premier obviously will make further announcements at the appropriate time about where the lockdown goes from here. Throughout our response as a Commonwealth Government, and equally at the state level, we have always followed key principles for providing that support. It needs to be targeted, it needs to be timely, it needs to be proportionate, scalable, and the administration of those supports need to be done in a way so it can get to people as simply and as quickly as is possible. That is what was so essential when in March of last year and April of last year we put in place the arrangements about the cash flow boost, the support payments to keep apprentices in jobs, and what ultimately then was done with programs like JobKeeper. Their design was built around those core principles. And so it has been the case as we've worked together over the course of these last few days to ensure that we can put in place an upgraded response for both individual and business support in the course of this lockdown as it goes into a protracted phase. Currently, right now, you are able to receive a payment if you've lost more than 20 hours of work a week in the Sydney metropolitan area, the Greater Sydney area, of $325. So if you've lost between 8 and 20 hours, doesn't matter if you're a casual, a part-time worker, a full-time worker, there is no application of what's called the liquid assets means test. You can call 180-2266 or go to the Services Australia website and you can apply for access to that payment. It works exactly like the disaster payments that we provide in the wake of whether it's a flood or a cyclone or any of those other events, bushfires and so on, that has been provided by the Commonwealth for disaster payments. You can get that payment right now. You don't have to have lost your job. You don't have to have left your employer. It doesn't matter who your employer is. If you have lost those hours, you can access that payment right now. What we have decided to do to go forward into week 4 is that those payments will be increased to $600 for those who have lost more than 20 hours and increased to $375 for those who have lost between 8 and 20 hours a week, or 1 day a week in hours, or up to 20 hours a week. Those payments, by applying for those first 4 local government areas that went into the lockdown first, that's this Friday, you apply again to access those payments, and then they become a recurring payment for the extent of the lockdown. So you won't need to keep reapplying all the time. Of course, if your circumstances changed and you get hours back, then we would require you to advise us of that and we would adjust the payments accordingly. But this ensures that as we go into the next week, that people can get that higher levels of support. They can get it through that simple process of calling 180-2266 or on the Services Australia website, and that payment is then recurring from that point on. Now, as a result of the partnership with the New South Wales Government, that payment will not only be made in the Greater Sydney area as defined by the Commonwealth hotspot, but because of the New South Wales Government support, they will be supplementing that to ensure that that payment can be made available statewide. So areas outside the Commonwealth hotspot area, and those two payments will be available right across the state of New South Wales, with New South Wales picking up the costs of that broader payment in the regional and rural areas, and the Commonwealth continuing to meet the costs in the metropolitan areas. I note that those payments of $600 and $375 were the payments that were in place during the December quarter, which was when the Victorian lockdown was still in place last year. Of the lockdowns we're looking at, this lockdown and the circumstances we're dealing with are more akin to what we saw at the beginning of that process than what we saw most recently. And I note that during that lockdown, the Commonwealth provided to the state of Victoria, in the form of JobKeeper, specifically $13.4 billion. That was the support provided to the Victorian public in relation to the long lockdown that we had, regrettably, in Victoria. I also note that in the Northern Beaches lockdown earlier this year, the Commonwealth provided over $1 billion in that support into those communities to provide support going through that very difficult time. So the payments are what they were back in the last quarter of last year at $600 and $375. The other thing we have agreed to do, and cost share 50-50, which the Premier and the Treasurer will go into more detail on, is to provide a direct payment to businesses up to a turnover of $50 million a year. That payment will be made. It's modelled on the program we did with the cash flow boost last year, which you'll remember we made payments of between $10,000 and $50,000 over a 3-month period. Okay, wasn't over a week or 2 weeks. It was made over a 3-month period, and we did that for 2 successive quarters. So through the cash flow boost, we provided as a Commonwealth Government between $20,000 and $100,000 to support the cash flow of businesses over a 6-month period. Now, it is certainly our intention and our hope, and I know the Premier and the Treasurers, that we will not be in that situation, and everything is being done to prevent that. And I thank those right across Sydney and more broadly across New South Wales for their patience in going through the current lockdown. But the payments that we'll be making to businesses of up to $50 million are $1,000 for sole traders, and then payments of between $1,500 and $10,000 per week, paid on a fortnightly basis to businesses of that order. And those payments have a maximum, as I said, of $10,000, and payments can be made up to 40% of turnover. So for the businesses that are much smaller, they will receive a minimum of $1,500, and then it goes at 40% of your payroll, I should say, not turnover, of your payroll amount, and then it maxes out at $10,000. That will come at a cost between the Commonwealth and the states of around $500 million a week, met equally by the state and the Commonwealth Government. And the New South Wales Treasurer and Premier will say more about that. The third area that I wanted to mention today is it's not just about getting through this economically, it's about bringing people through in a healthy state of mind. As we found in the Victorian lockdown, the provision of additional mental health support was absolutely critical. We'll be doing that again here with the state government. Commonwealth is committing $12.25 million as part of around about a $7.5 million package thereabouts, which will be providing additional supports of $1.5 million to Lifeline. This is from the Commonwealth. Support for Kids Helpline, Headspace, Beyond Blue, a range of key organisations that have been so critical to supporting the mental health of, at that time, Victorians, and now those from Sydney and New South Wales who can access that additional support through these services. The Butterfly Foundation also receiving support, youth support, as I said, through Headspace. I particularly want to send a message to those students who are doing their HSC, which I'm sure the Treasurer and the Premier will join me in sending. We know this is a tough time for you. HSC students in 2020 were going through a very similar process, particularly down there in Victoria. And you will get through this. This support is being put there particularly to help you. And so I'd encourage parents and community members to let young people know that help is at hand and you can access that help, and we are upping the services to ensure that that help will be there for you as you go through what I know is a very difficult time. So you're very much in our thoughts. So to summarise again, additional support for individuals, additional support for businesses through a new shared program between the Commonwealth and the state government, and additional support to help people with their mental health as they go through this pandemic lockdown. I'll hand you over to the Premier.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prime Minister, and can I begin by thanking you and our respective Treasurers, Josh Frydenberg and Dom Perrottet, for working so closely together to be able to deliver this package for the people of New South Wales. And whilst the Prime Minister has quite rightly outlined what is the national framework for these payments, the New South Wales Government was very pleased to be able to extend with our part of the payments to all of New South Wales, so that no matter where you live, if you're suffering because of the stay-at-home provisions, you are able to make sure that you and your loved ones don't go through that stress no matter how the lockdown lasts. Now, can I make this point? Our intention always is to have this lockdown not go longer than it needs to, but these payments will make sure that whether you're someone who runs a business or someone who's an employee, you'll be able to respect the rules we've put in place and also have peace of mind. It's really having peace of mind and also the ability to follow the health advice, because they're the two things that will help us get through this lockdown. And that's why I'm very pleased with the package that's announced today. Essentially, individuals will go through Services Australia for their payments, and businesses will go through Services New South Wales. And in terms of where you get your information, they're the two bodies that you go to, and we make sure that we give you the information you need during what is, we understand, a very stressful time for people. I'm also pleased to say that the New South Wales Treasurer will also announce other measures that we'll be taking as a state government, which are over and above what the Prime Minister has announced, and they're specific to our state, including payroll tax exemptions and other opportunities for businesses to get support from us. But in the first instance, I do want to thank the Prime Minister, the Federal Treasurer, and also my Treasurer here in New South Wales for the work they've done to support New South Wales during this difficult time. We never can predict the twists and turns of a pandemic, but what we do know is that in order to have this lockdown end in a timely way but also provide support to our citizens, it's important to make these arrangements clear as soon as possible, and I'm grateful for the speed with which the Commonwealth has responded to the issues that we raised. I now ask Treasurer Perrottet to outline some New South Wales specific details, and then we'll take questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Premier. We know it's a very challenging and difficult time for businesses and workers right across the state. This is not just a health crisis, it's an economic one too. And our message today to every business and every worker right across New South Wales is that we've got through the last 18 months, and together we will get through this period of time as well. The package that we've developed, we believe, provides support for every worker, for every business right across the state. I want to join the Premier in thanking the Prime Minister and the Federal Treasurer for the constructive and cooperative way that we've worked through the details of this cash booster scheme, which will provide important cash flow to businesses to ensure we keep as many workers in work and as many businesses going during this period of time. An important part of this package is to ensure that those businesses who access this payment will also be required not to reduce their headcount. We want to keep as many workers in work during this period of time. The New South Wales economy is stronger today than it was before the pandemic. We've always said we'll prioritise the economy before the budget. We have done that, and that's ensured the economy is stronger, that more people are in work than when the pandemic began, and that's where we'll be once we get through this difficult time as well. As the Premier has indicated, we'll also be providing support as part of that disaster payment for workers right across the state who will be able to access that, not just in the hotspots that have been declared. So as the Premier has outlined, those payments can be made through Services Australia, and we encourage all workers right across New South Wales, because we know This is not just focused on Sydney. There are many workers who are doing it tough outside those areas, and they'll now be able to access that program as well. In addition to this program today, we're also announcing a further expansion and extension to our small business grants. They will increase, and access to those will be expanded for businesses with payrolls of up to $10 million. We will also be deferring all payroll tax liabilities for the next 2 months, and for those businesses with a reduction in turnover of 30%, which are under $10 million in payrolls, we will completely waive payroll tax for the first quarter this year. We're also providing support for micro businesses as part of the package today. Those businesses with a turnover of less than $75,000 but greater than $30,000 will have received a turnover reduction of 30% during this period of time. Will receive a payment of $1,500 per fortnight, starting from week 1 of the lockdown period until the completion. In addition to that, we will also be providing support for tenants, commercial tenants and retail tenants. We will be mandating that there'll be no lockouts or evictions during this period of time, and any rent reduction from landlords to their tenants in that space, we will provide a rebate or discount in relation to land tax payable from that landlord to the state. So we want to encourage retailers right across New South Wales to work with landlords to make sure we all get through this difficult time together. In addition to that, we'll also be providing protections when it comes to residential tenancies. There will be no evictions for the next 60 days for those who are doing it tough, for workers who have had a reduction in income by 25%. I will also provide the same land tax reductions and rebates for residential landlords who can provide some rental relief for their tenants. For those landlords that don't qualify for land tax, we'll provide a $1,500 payment as well to also reduce the rental obligations for those tenants. We're also providing today, in addition to the mental health support with the Commonwealth Government, some extra support to ensure that those people right across New South Wales who are sleeping rough, close to another additional 4,000 temporary accommodation places in the state. It's a program that has worked from the start of the pandemic. We want to make sure that whoever you are right across the state, all vulnerable people are given the protections and support they can. We have always said from the start that we will prioritise the economy before the budget. So whether you're a casual worker, a permanent worker, a small business, a large business, the New South Wales Government has your back. We are going to get through this difficult time and come out stronger on the other side. I want to finish by thanking the Prime Minister and the Federal Treasurer once again for working very closely and putting together what I believe with the New South Wales Government today is an unprecedented package that will help every single person through this state get through this difficult time. Thank you. Well, in conjunction with the Commonwealth, we're putting another $4.1 billion. So our package today is $4.1 billion, with the Commonwealth over $5 billion. The $1.4 billion for that small business program has been expanded. That will now be $2.1 billion and will provide an opportunity for small businesses to have access to, was previously up to $10,000 in grants. That will now be up to $15,000 to provide that important support. Well, some of those payments are one-off payments, but obviously with the package that we're announcing today for, in conjunction with the Commonwealth, will be paid on a fortnightly basis for as long as the lockdown continues, and obviously for some of the support packages in relation to those micro businesses, that will play out as well from week 1 for the duration of the lockdown.
To make a point, just hang on a second. Just on the individual payments, they will go, that is the $600 payment, $375. That will continue as long as the lockdown continues. Oh, yeah. And of course, the point that the Treasurer has just made is that we estimate the cost of this each week is around $500 million. It's demand driven, so that's not an allocation, that's just a very initial estimate of what the expenditure may be in these circumstances, and the Commonwealth understands that we'll be continuing to support that for as long as the lockdown remains in place, and hopefully that won't be too long, and I have no doubt that New South Wales will ensure it will only go as long as it have to, but it'll go for as long as it needs to.
Prime Minister, regards to the The New South Wales Treasurer mentioned the cash flow payments would require staffing levels not to adjust. I think it's from 13 July. How will you enforce that, and what are the penalties?
Well, it's based on a head count as of the date of the announcement, which is today, and the undertaking for people receiving this payment is that that's what they will indeed do. Now, we've had similar type arrangements in place in the past. We expect people to honour their commitments, and you know what? People have. There's right now, in particularly in New South Wales, but I'd say more broadly, it was only a month ago that employers were coming to me saying that we needed to get more people into the country because they needed more workers. People in New South Wales, employers, and particularly in New South Wales, understand that the labour market has got a lot tighter over the course of this last 12 months. 1 million people, thereabouts, have come back into work since the pit of the recession caused by the COVID pandemic. So it's not in any New South Wales employer's interest to leave staff behind at the moment. They know that they will need those staff in a few weeks' time, hopefully. It's as soon as that. And they'll be wanting to keep them on their books. And so that's why I just want to stress with this payment again, you can still remain with your employer. So you may have been working 40 hours a week and you have agreed to reduce your hours down to 20 hours a week. That means you can keep working in that business under those arrangements, and you can pick up the $600 payment from the Commonwealth, and that will help you continue to go through what is a difficult time. Previously, those payments were made through JobKeeper. Because that was a national scheme involving very large scale, that's not necessary on this occasion. We can get those payments directly to people who have lost those hours directly through the Services Australia system. I can't hear you, sorry.
How often will people businesses and individuals have to verify that they've either lost hours or they've lost turnover?
Well, I'll let the Treasurer speak to the second matter, but for individuals, they will have to go on, if they're in those first four, I think it was, Gladys, LGAs, they're eligible to go on this Friday and to make their claim for these new payments, and then they are recurring. You don't need to go back in after that for the extent of the lockdown. For businesses, it's also a one-step process, but the Treasurer can give you the timelines on the registration and application and payment timeframes for that.
Yeah, thanks, Prime Minister. So in relation to the small business grants, which you've already announced, applications can be made on the 19th of July. And in relation to the joint arrangement with the Commonwealth for that cash booster program, expression of interest will be open tomorrow. We want those funds out the door as quickly as possible. But importantly, this provides certainty to businesses that they can keep their staff on. That's why all our programs have ensured that on application you must make sure that you do not reduce your headcount. We are going to get through this. It's a difficult time, but we want to keep as much cash flow going into businesses as during this time, and we believe that the quantum of this program, this unprecedented investment, will ensure that we'll get through the other side stronger than ever. I mean, in relation to the question on the individual payments, as the Prime Minister has said, once that application is made through Services Australia, it's then an ongoing payment for the length of the lockdown.
Expressions of interest open tomorrow for the cash booster program. Expressions of interest open tomorrow. When will money go out the door?
Now, as quickly as possible. Obviously, we want to make sure that those funds are verified. We're working very closely with Service New South Wales. We've had success in the past in relation to getting that money as quickly as possible to businesses who need it. In relation to the small business application, as I said, on the 19th, applications open. It's within 6 days, and payments will be processed by Service New South Wales within 4 days. So that's the payment of $15,000 for businesses with a reduction of 70% turnover. A payment of $7,500 for businesses with a reduction of 50% turnover. Those payments will be available for application on 19th of July. And in relation to the program we're announcing today in conjunction with the Commonwealth, we want expressions of interest will be open tomorrow, and we will have applications opened as quickly as possible and as close to the date that we have for those small business grants.
It would seem obvious, but is this, we now agree with the lockdown does continue?
Oh, look, I've already made clear the unlikelihood of the lockdown finishing on Friday, and the numbers speak for themselves, and we'll have more to say about that tomorrow. But what this does is give us peace of mind and a breather for everybody, in that when you provide that economic support for individuals and businesses, it gives us the freedom to do what we need on the health side by asking everybody to respect the advice that we're providing, but also having that confidence not to leave the house unless you absolutely have to. And this financial support, which we're very grateful is a joint measure with the Commonwealth and ourselves, gives us that freedom, gives everybody that breather to be able to follow the health advice and to try and get out of this lockdown as quickly as we can. So I wouldn't read too much into the length of the lockdown, because none of us know that. But what we do know is that we have the financial support there so that individuals and families and businesses don't have to stress, and they know that for the duration of the lockdown the support will be there, and the support will be there both from the Commonwealth and from the state government, working together to make sure every individual or business across the state has access to it, which is very important. And also, irrespective of when the payment goes in the bank accounts, and obviously we'd like that to happen as quickly as possible, it gives people peace of mind so that your bank or whomever you deal with has peace of mind the money is coming, it's there, and you can make decisions against that.
Prime Minister, we keep hearing that the Delta strain is a completely new variant and completely changed the game, and that we can't live with the Delta variant until the majority of our adult population here in New South Wales is vaccinated. We can't live with the Delta variant and cases don't come under control, and the health advice necessitates a longer lockdown. Is the Commonwealth prepared to pay all of this cash until the vast majority of our adult population is vaccinated?
Well, what I indicated at the outset was that what I'm announcing today is not just a partnership with New South Wales. What I'm announcing today is an upgrading of the Commonwealth Government's national response. So it is certainly our hope and ambition that we would not see lockdowns extending like we're seeing them here in New South Wales and other states and territories. But as I said, COVID-19 will set those rules. And so what we're saying is that when situations get like this, it is in the national interest that we ensure that a lockdown that is occurring here in New South Wales will be effective. It will be effective, and that Australians living here in New South Wales and across particularly the Greater Sydney area know that the sacrifices they're making will get the job done, and that we'll support them through that. Help is here, and help is on the way as well. That's, I think, our key message. Sure, it's a very good question. Now, first of all, I'd say you've got to look at it as a combination of both the business support and the support we're providing directly to individuals. So the $600 support, the business now no longer, if they've reduced hours of someone, they don't have to be as concerned as they were before under JobKeeper to make those payments. The Commonwealth Government is making those payments. So if you're an employer, and sadly you may have had casual employees, or you're speaking to your permanent employees and say, we really need you to do less hours at the moment because we can't afford to pay that, they can say ring 1-800-2266 and the Commonwealth will be able to give you that income support to get through that period of time for a couple of weeks. So that would have otherwise gone through the business. Now it's going direct to the person who needs that money. That means it's available right now. Help is there right now. And so if you get on that line, which is Friday for those first 4 LGAs, for the rest of the state and the broader Greater Metropolitan Sydney area, it's Monday, then you can access that. For the businesses, we have modelled this on the cash flow boost that we provided last year. And so to give you an example, the weekly payment that was made under the cash flow boost last year for businesses with a turnover of, say, $75,000 a year was $769. Under this program, it's $1,500. If you look at a business with a turnover of around $1 million last time, then the payments that were made available back then were around $1,900, and they're $1,900 now. When you go to a business which has a turnover of some $5 million, then previously they were receiving a $3,846 cash boost per week. Under this program, they're getting $7,692. See, what we've learnt during the pandemic is you do what works. And when you need to do it again, you do what works. And the support that is being provided through this cash flow boost is not only commensurate with what was provided last time, but in most cases it's actually greater because it needs to be more concentrated. It's kicking in week 4, and it will go for as long as the lockdown requires.
Just on the lockdown, if I could ask the New South Wales Treasurer, you reportedly disagreed with the Premier. You thought that there shouldn't be an extension of the lockdown. Is that still your view, or have you been mugged by reality?
Not at all. I mean, we're going to talk about discussions we have in crisis cabinet, but ultimately we've always balanced here in our state the economic needs with the health needs, and this is not just a health crisis. And every single business and worker out there right across our state who's struggling right now, we say today that we have your back. And the Prime Minister's spoken about the challenges of different variants. The reality is, and the difficult reality is that as you see around the world, that as these variants change, there are always challenges as the vaccination period rolls out. And ultimately, we will have to learn to live alongside the virus. And we don't want to be in a position, we've always resisted going into lockdowns in this state. There has to be a balanced and proportionate response. We have always done that. We want to keep the people of New South Wales safe. We have done that. We've done that right across the country in a way that is world leading. And ultimately, we're in a position economically where New South Wales is stronger today than it was at the outset of the pandemic. So yes, there are challenges facing our state and our country, but also we have come through the last 18 months and will come out stronger during this period of time as well.
The Premier said today that the international students plan is basically on pause. The lockdown has really threatened that. What does that mean for the plan? I mean, do you think that we can still go ahead in any realistic?
Well, we're committed to looking at the pilot, and obviously right now the complete focus of the New South Wales government is making sure we keep our people safe, we keep as many businesses in business and as many workers in jobs during this period of time. That is the Premier's focus, that is my focus, that is our entire crisis cabinet focus. But also that is a very important industry to the New South Wales economy, and we need to ensure that we get international students back into our state as quickly as possible. There are tens of thousands of men and women right across our state who rely on that industry for work. We're completely committed to doing it, and obviously we'll deal with this challenge that's in front of us now, this immediate challenge, and then we'll get back to work on ensuring that we bring back that industry to New South Wales. And importantly, I'll make this comment as well, when it comes to bringing back returning Australians. Let's not forget that New South Wales has taken the lion's share of returning Australians. More than half of those Australians returning back to this country have come through Sydney. We have done the heavy lifting in relation to that. We'll always act in the national interest in that space, but ultimately that is an industry. It's our largest service export here in New South Wales, our second largest overall export. And it's important for many men and women right across our state who rely on that industry to provide for their families.
Well, there's always other factors, and what I said at the press conference we had here last week was that, of course, the decisions we're making will be informed, absolutely, the Premier and I and the other members of the National Cabinet, because as the Treasurer just rightly said, there are a range of interests here, and there are the economic interests, there are the health and wellbeing interests, and of course there's the epidemiology, which we've asked them to provide advice on. What the Doherty Institute can give to leaders is what the spectrum of risk is. Now, in the UK at the moment, they haven't quite reached 65% on 2 doses. The UK government has made a series of decisions. They're also seeing, we know, very high levels of cases, and they've seen some escalation in the levels of hospitalisation. There are a lot of experiences that we're watching very closely around the world, and there is no simple, definitive pop-out answer here. It's based on an assessment and evaluation of risk. And what we've asked the Doherty Institute to indicate to us is what that balance of risk is, and how you can then adjust measures to suit that risk to ensure that we meet all the objectives that we need to have as a country. What is important is that we continue to move as quickly as we possibly can, certainly by this time next week, and indeed earlier, we will have passed the mark of over 10 million doses, and the vaccination program continues to gather pace. And that is welcome. The additional Pfizer doses that come available, the additional that were provided to New South Wales this week, the opening of new clinics and the opening of new clinics. The Chester Hill Clinic, I understand, is opening very, very soon, importantly in southwestern Sydney. All of this is happening. And so it's important that people go and support that. And I believe that by the end of this year, we will have gotten that position where we have offered everybody who seeks a vaccine, and we are aiming to have that percentage as high as it possibly can be. But on that note, can I thank the Premier? Can I thank the Treasurer? Can I thank Treasurer Frydenberg as well? And all of our Treasury officials who've been burning the midnight oil over the course of these last few days, particularly last night, for the great work that they've been doing to bring together what I think is a very important package. We have always got through COVID together. Governments have got through it together. Communities have got through it together. Families have got through it together. And that will continue to be the case. This is a next level of partnership that is necessary to ensure the sacrifices that are being made across Greater Sydney and across New South Wales are going to get the results that we're looking for. And that is that we can move back into the position we were at some weeks ago, and that we can get those people back to work, those jobs saved, Treasurer, and ensuring that we're in a position for New South Wales economy to pick up where it left off, which has been, the powerhouse of the national economy, frankly, during the course of the COVID pandemic. Thank you all very much for your attention.